ready to dive into some serious strategy. Today, we're traveling back in time to ancient China to explore the brilliant mind of Sun Tzu and his military masterpiece, The Art of War.
It's incredible how a text written centuries ago can still feel so relevant today.
Right. Sun Tzu's insights into strategy, leadership, and human nature are just timeless.
Totally. We're going to unpack how these principles, honed on ancient battlefields, can apply to everything from business deals to personal growth.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of The Art of War, I think it's worth talking about the man himself, who was Sun Tzu.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The truth is we don't actually know that much about Sun Tzu, the person.
Oh, real? So he's kind of an enigma, this mysterious figure.
Exactly. He's shrouded in mystery. Some scholars even debate whether Sun Tzu was actually one person, a title passed down, or maybe even a group of military strategists. It's fascinating.
So like a legend built around this almost mythical figure adds to the intrigue for sure.
Right. But what we do have are the writings of Sima Qian, a historian who lived a few centuries after Sun Tzu's time. He tells us Sun Tzu was a brilliant general who served the Wu state sometime around the 6th century BC.
Okay, so we have at least some historical placing for him.
We do, and get this, there's this amazing story about Sun Tzu being tasked with training the king's concubines.
Wait, hold on. He trained concubines for battle.
Yep, the women of the royal court. Apparently the king wanted to see if Sun Tzu was as good as everyone said.
So this wasn't your typical military exercise. What happened?
So the story goes, to really drive home the point about discipline and obedience, Sun Tzu ordered the execution of 2 high-ranking concubines who disobeyed his commands during the training.
Wow. That's pretty hardcore. Obviously, a very different time and place with very different values.
For sure. But I think it shows the kind of unwavering commitment to strategy that Sun Tzu embodied, even if it meant making incredibly tough calls.
He was definitely not afraid to make a statement.
Not at all. And it wasn't just about physical strength for Sun Tzu. He understood that true victory came from mental fortitude, cunning planning, and strategic brilliance. It's what makes The Art of War so much more than just a military manual. It's got this philosophical depth to it, this exploration of human psychology that's just as relevant now as it was then.
Definitely not your average war manual. And that brings us to just how influential The Art of War has been over the centuries.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it. This one text has been pored over by everyone, from military leaders and CEOs to politicians and even athletes.
It's true, The Art of War pops up in all sorts of unexpected places.
Yeah, boardrooms, political campaigns, self-improvement books. It's this incredible testament to the enduring power of Sun Tzu's ideas about strategy, power, and how to achieve success.
It speaks to our desire to not just understand conflict, but to, I guess, master it in a way.
Exactly. And on that note,
It's wild to think about how these ancient strategies still resonate today, in a world that's vastly different from ancient battlefields.
right. Sun Tzu was ahead of his time. Like, take one of his most famous quotes. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting.
They feel like we've all heard that one before. But what does it actually mean in practice?
Well, for Sun Tzu, it's all about outmaneuvering your opponent. Achieving your objectives, sure, but with the fewest losses possible.
So it's less about shying away from conflict altogether and more about choosing your battles.
Absolutely. It's that classic idea of strategy over brute force. Sun Tzu knew that direct confrontation should always be a last resort, not your go-to move.
And that has implications way beyond the battlefield.
Yeah,
Right?
100%. Take the business world, for instance. A skilled negotiator, someone who's really at the top of their game, they can leverage timing, information, even psychology to get what they want without a messy, drawn-out fight.
So it's about being smart, not just aggressive.
Exactly. It's about understanding your opponent's motivations, finding those win-win situations. Sun Tzu would approve, I think.
I love how these ancient ideas can apply to something as modern as, like, a corporate merger.
It's kind of amazing, right? And it goes even further than that. Think about personal relationships a lot of the time. The best way to resolve a conflict isn't by shouting or getting angry, but by actually listening to the other person, understanding where they're coming from.
Finding that common ground,
Yeah.
right? Instead of trying to steamroll the other person.
Exactly. And that takes us to another one of Sun Tzu's gems. If you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. If you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete.
Okay, lots to unpack there. The first part, knowing yourself and your enemy, seems pretty intuitive, though. understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of your opponent.
Exactly. Self-awareness is huge, but what's just as important is being able to accurately size up your opponent. What are they capable of? And where are their weak points?
And then there's that second part, about knowing heaven and earth. That feels a bit more, I don't know, metaphorical.
Right. That's where Sun Tzu's genius really shines through. He's talking about understanding the bigger picture here. Heaven can refer to timing, momentum. Are things moving in your favor, or are you fighting an uphill battle?
So it's like knowing when to act decisively and when to hold back.
Exactly. And then earth, that's more about the tangible elements of your environment. For Sun Tzu, it was the literal terrain of the battlefield.
But for us, it could be the political landscape, the market forces at play in a particular industry, even just the vibe of a negotiation.
Exactly. You've got to adapt your approach to the specific circumstances. No one-size-fits-all strategy. Which actually brings us to another great quote. He who can modify his tactics in relation to his opponent and thereby succeed in winning may be called a heaven-born captain.
So flexibility is key. It's not enough to have a great plan. You have to be able to adjust it on the fly.
Exactly. Rigidity. That's a weakness in Sun Tzu's book. A truly skilled strategist is adaptable, responsive. They can navigate obstacles, change course when they need to. They're like water.
Like water, I like that.
Yeah.
It always finds a way, right? Even if it's not the most direct route.
Precisely. It's a principle that's more important now than ever, especially in the business world. Companies that can't adapt to new technologies or changing consumer demands, well, they get left behind.
It's the name of the game these days, adapt or die.
Right. And it applies to our personal lives, too. Being open to new information, being willing to pivot when things aren't working, that's how you thrive.
So we've talked about knowing yourself, knowing your enemy, adapting to the circumstances. Anything else we should have on our Sun Tzu cheat sheet?
We have to talk about the 9 situations. Sun Tzu identified 9 different types of battlegrounds that a leader might find themselves on.
The 9 situations. Sounds intriguing. So these were literal battlefields.
Well, yes and no. He was talking about physical landscapes, but they also represent different strategic situations that anyone might encounter.
So it's like a framework for assessing any kind of challenge.
Right. He's saying, look, if you can understand the nature of the ground you're fighting on, literally or metaphorically, you're way more likely to succeed.
And what were some of these 9 situations?
Well, he talked about dispersive ground, where your troops are tempted to scatter, facile ground, which is easy to cross, contentious ground, where you're fighting for every inch. Each one comes with its own unique challenges.
So there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. You have to be able to read the situation.
Exactly. He categorized them as dispersive, facile, contentious, open, ground of intersecting highways, serious, difficult, hemmed in, and desperate grounds, each with its own set of considerations.
And even though he was writing about warfare, I'm guessing these 9 situations could apply to modern-day scenarios, too.
Totally. Imagine a CEO dealing with a hostile takeover attempt. They might be on hemmed-in ground, having to conserve their resources and forge alliances to survive.
Or a company launching a new product in a saturated market. That sounds like contentious ground to me.
Right. It's amazing how relevant these ancient principles can be. Whether you're talking about boardrooms, battlefields, or even just your own personal life, Sun Tzu's insights provide this incredible framework for analyzing challenges, figuring out your opponent's motivations, and coming up with a winning strategy.
It's like he created a blueprint for success that transcends time and context. But with all this talk about strategy and competition, do we really have to look at everything as a battle, though? It makes you wonder.
Such a good point. I think it comes down to how we choose to interpret and apply Sun Tzu, right? Because at its core, the art of war isn't really about glorifying conflict. It's about understanding it, and then using that understanding to chart the most strategic path forward.
So it's more about being mindful, strategic, than always being ready to fight.
Exactly. It's about using those principles, like planning, adaptability, knowing your opponent, whether that's a tough competitor, a difficult person in your life, or even your own self-doubt.
Interesting. So much of it comes back to that self-awareness, huh?
Totally. Like, say you're going into a job interview. You can absolutely use that idea of knowing yourself and your enemy.
Okay, so in that situation, I'd want to be really prepared, obviously, know my own strengths, but also anticipate the kind of questions they might ask me, really understand the company and how my skills fit into what they need.
Exactly. You're not walking in blind. You've thought about the situation, you know what's at stake, and you're ready to position yourself strategically.
Like a game of chess, almost. Trying to think a few moves ahead.
And that actually takes us right back to Sun Tzu's point about adaptability. because he knew that no plan survives contact with the enemy perfectly, you know? You have to be able to adjust on the fly, respond to those unexpected curveballs.
Right. So how do we get better at that, at being more adaptable? Is that an innate thing, or can you learn it?
Oh man, that's the question, isn't it? I tend to think it's a skill you can develop, like building a muscle.
So how do you train that adaptability muscle?
It starts with being open to new info, being willing to say, maybe what I thought was true isn't, and having that attitude of always wanting to learn.
Makes sense. Being okay with not having all the answers and being willing to shift gears when you need to.
Yes, and it's not just external changes either. Sun Tzu was big on self-awareness, remember? Like being in control of your emotions, keeping your eye on the prize, all that matters.
Because if you're letting your own emotions run the show, you're not going to be as effective at dealing with whatever's coming at you.
Exactly. Sun Tzu knew that things like fear or even overconfidence could be just as dangerous as any external threat.
Okay, so there's this inner game, this internal landscape that we need to master as well.
100%. Sun Tzu really does offer this complete approach to strategy, the internal and the external.
This has been fascinating. I mean, who would have thought a text written centuries ago about warfare could be so relevant to, like, everyday life in 2024? It's pretty amazing.
It speaks to how deeply Sun Tzu understood human nature, right? And the principles of strategy, leadership, those are timeless.
They really are. So as we start to wrap up here, is there one big takeaway, one thing you really want our listeners to walk away from this conversation thinking about?
I would say think about the battlefields in your own life. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about actual war here, but think about the areas where you need to be strategic, where adaptability is key. And remember the importance of knowing yourself and those opponents, whatever form they take in your world.
So whether it's a tough negotiation at work, or going after a promotion, or even just navigating a tricky relationship.
Yeah. Sun Tzu's wisdom can actually be incredibly helpful.
I love that. We can all use a bit of ancient wisdom to navigate the modern world.
Absolutely.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the art of war.
My pleasure. And to everyone listening, remember Sun Tzu's ideas are as relevant today as ever, so keep those principles in mind.
Yes, and may you win all your battles, big and small.
Hear, hear.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, there's always something new to discover.